How's everybody doing today? You know what I love about organic farming? I do a lot of conferences, and I do conventional and organic, and the organic ones actually know how to make coffee. It's so nice. So I co-direct the Moses Organic Farming Conference out in La Crosse, Wisconsin, in addition to farming. And we always hear from the people at the Radisson Center out there that we use twice as much, our people go through twice as much coffee per person, and then we demand that they brew it twice as strong. So it throws off all their calculations in terms of how things are supposed to work. So we're talking today about capturing and organizing data for GAPS, organic certification, and other endeavors. And when I sat down to start working on this slideshow a couple of weeks ago, I read the description that I'd sent off to Kristen Hoy, 6 months ago, and I said, oh my God, I was really ambitious. So we're going to see what we can do here. Okay, so that's me. That's Rock Spring Farm. That's where I farm. We have about 20 acres of certified organic produce up in the northeast corner of Iowa. We market most of our produce up into the Twin Cities in Minnesota, so it's about a 2.5-hour drive to get up there. Our farm, there's a lot of things about our farm that are different than a lot of the other farms in our area. We do a lot of packaged product. We do about a third of our business is done in fresh herbs, and we put them in those little tiny plastic clamshells. We buy in herbs over the winter from other farms. We actually ship most of our stuff in during this time of year from Jacob's farm out in California, so we have to have a system in place for tracking that. We don't do any of our own transportation anymore. We've hired that out, because we didn't want to carry the capital cost of having a truck to drive just 1 or 2 days a week, and besides which I got sick of doing deliveries. So those are kind of some things that as we go through this, I'm going to be sharing a lot of stuff from my farm. It's things that I've shared with other growers that they've found to be useful over the years, but I want to emphasize that not all of this is going to be applicable everywhere, but I think that what I tried to do with this talk was to look at the structures of what we've done in terms of record keeping and think about how to give more of a broad general overview of how to think about that, adapt things to your farm, and some ideas and techniques that would be useful as we go through this. So I've been farming for over 20 years. That's an unlikely picture of me back in 1990. I am still a little bit of a dirty hippie, even though I have an entirely different haircut these days. I farmed all over the country, lots of different places, and have been lucky to work mostly on certified organic farms. I worked in plant breeding for a little while. I've worked in seed preservation. So I have a lot of background in being really anal about keeping track of information. When you do seed breeding or preservation work, you're tracking tomato varieties and keeping that through the whole chain becomes really a big deal. And I've done just about everything there is to do on a farm. I've managed farms for myself. I've managed farms for other people. I've managed packing houses. I've done tractor operation, and I've gone out and hand weeded the onions. So, and really ran the whole gamut. So, and about 4 years ago, we started a series of crises on my farm that actually caused us to, rather than dropping our record-keeping needs, to actually upgrade and ask for more out of our record-keeping process. So we had floods in 2007 and 2008. My work with the Moses Organic Farming Conference really began to increase, turned in from something that was taking about a fifth of my time to something that now takes about a third of my time. I got invited to start going out and interviewing other farmers and writing up some reports about how folks were doing post-harvest handling and transplant production on their farms. And so spent some time doing that, but that also took me away from the farm, because of course the time to be out doing that is in the middle of the farming season. And as a result, we ended up hiring a farm manager, Ben Kreuter. Oh, and somewhere in there I got a divorce too, so that I lost my business partner and had a need to be able to transfer more of the operation over to other people. So, my primary role on the farm now with Ben's help has been, I don't do much tractor work. I don't do a lot of employee management direct one-on-one. He's my farm manager. He's running things day to day. Yesterday he was getting CSA deliveries out the door. So we've had to develop techniques that not only allow me to give good instructions to Ben, but also then allow Ben to get good instructions and feedback from other people, and for me to be able to verify that what's happening on the farm is what's supposed to be happening on the farm. The other thing that we ran into was a vendor who wanted us to go through the GAPS process, the Good Agricultural Practices. They want us to get a third-party audit for that with the USDA. So we went through the process of writing a food safety plan and developing all of the record-keeping systems for that, at which point my employees looked at me and went, "You're crazy. How the hell do we know which piece of paper to fill out when?" Because we ended up with about 60 different forms. And if you go through the standard process that they say to go through for the GAPS, they want you to just have log after log after log after log. And my people said, we can't do this. We don't know what to do when, and we're already stretched to the max for time and ability to get this stuff done. So we went back to the drawing board and began developing from the ground up systems for keeping track of the information that didn't involve hanging a clipboard on the wall and putting a bunch of numbers on it after you did anything in the packing house or in the field. So in thinking about record keeping then, record keeping is really about summarizing, organizing, and analyzing. And you do it for you. And I think this is something that it's really easy to miss as we set up these systems, because we set up a bookkeeping system. Why do most people keep a bookkeeping system? For taxes. Why do most people keep records about their harvest and be able to track things back to the day in the field on which it was harvested? Because the organic certifier says you have to do it. You know, why do you keep track of a cooler log? Because the GAPS audit says you have to do it. So what we wanted to do was more than that. It's not good enough for me just to do things for other people. I want things that are going to make my farm run better. Theoretically, that's what all these things are for, right? They're to make your farm run better. But if you do them with the added, except for the taxes, they don't give a rat's ass. But what we really want to do with the finances is make them useful for us and into something that we can use. And I think people don't use all that stuff a lot of times because it's not constructed in a way that's useful for them. They're not getting the information when and how they need it in a way that they can interpret it and make it useful on their own operations. And then we have to take all of those different pieces and we want to weave them together and understand how all the pieces are connected on the farm. You know, there is this whole kind of this interlacing and how things track through the operation. And that's a big piece of what we're doing with with all of these, with GAPS, with bookkeeping, with the organic certification, is tracking things as they go through the life cycle on our farm, or the use cycle on our farm. So with data, we want to collect our data, we want to process the data, we want to use the data. That's really important. And then we want to file it away. And we want to file it in a way that's appropriate so that to the level at which we're going to get it back out at the end. A lot of people spend a lot of time being really anal about, you know, maybe filing all of their receipts by vendor, you know. So now you've got 26 files to keep track of. But how often do you actually need to go look up a receipt? I think I've gone and dug a receipt out of my bookkeeping system maybe 5 times in the last 6 months. So if I spend a lot of time filing things and being really anal about how they're organized in my filing cabinet, just so that when I need the information I can go and grab it just like that, well, I've got a disparity of effort there, and I'm likely to actually have a backlog on the front end. What I'd rather have is things be loosely organized so that I can get close and kind of search out from there, and maybe I'm going to get lucky and maybe I'm not, but I know that within 5 or 10 minutes I can find any receipt that I need to get on my farm. But in the meantime, I'm not spending any time filing it. I'm just getting it into the files very quickly. We'll talk a little bit about how we do that later. So we also need then structures that are going to help us collect it so that you'll use it. You know, if you don't have a way to collect the data and then process it quickly, you end up not using it. So you end up with, you know, you see farmers who end up with a pile of receipts in a shoebox at the end of the year that they pull out for doing their taxes. That's not a useful way to keep your information. And it doesn't provide you with the kind of feedback that you need as you go through the year. And then I also want to remind us at the beginning here that this process, and this comes out of the Alan Savory and the holistic management folks. They talk about this process of plan, monitor, control, and replan, and they talk about it as being a circle. And so the idea is that you plan what you're going to do, you monitor what you're doing, and see if you're getting the results that you want to get. If you're not getting the results that you want to get, you control to get the results that you want to get. And if things really change, if the situation on the ground changes, then you need to replan. And then you start the process all over again at the beginning of the next year. And so you can do this financially, but you can also do this incorporating this into monitoring what's happening with on a yearly basis in your fields, but also on a weekly and daily basis in the fields. You make a plan for what's going to happen for the week. You monitor to see whether it got done. You make appropriate actions to get things back on track. And if you get a flood, you figure out how to do something different. So talking a little bit then about the parameters of a record keeping. I'm a geek. And, you know, I like my phones and I have all my little systems for everything. And it's really easy to get caught up in the cup, you know. But it's really about the coffee, right? A good cup can't make bad coffee taste good. But you take good coffee out of a bad cup, it's still good coffee. So we want to make sure that we're focused on outcomes and not just on the structures that we've created to create those outcomes. We want systems that are responsive to what we're doing. It's really easy to get into things that are very rigid and defined. and don't give us what we need, but also aren't adaptable and fluid to the situations that we find ourselves in. As organic farmers especially, but I think as farmers in general, we're faced with a constantly changing environment, and we need the ability to flex and adapt to that as we go. We're really not afraid to use paper, okay? I can't believe, all of the effort that I see that goes in, this is my own personal pet peeve, but especially with leftist organic hippie types, all of the effort that goes into saving one gosh darn sheet of paper, and how much time gets spent doing that, and how much money gets spent doing that, buy 100% post-consumer recycled content paper and use a lot of it. Because then the more you use, you're actually creating demand for the product, and that's a good, okay? And it's not that much more expensive. We're also not afraid to use technology wherever it makes sense. And me and Ben, we're both a little bit, we have a tendency to kind of fall off we go, oh yeah, that's cool, let's go into that. So we actually have to restrain ourselves. But we found that a little bit of technology injected at the right places can give us tremendous benefits. And so it's a great tool to be able to leverage. And we need systems that are easy enough to work all the time so that we don't end up with a pile of crap at the end of the season that we're not applying at the right time of year. When we're doing our record-keeping systems, then we really like to incorporate instructions into them. So almost any form that we have on the farm will tell you how to fill out the form, so that there's no reason to get it wrong. And this is especially important if you have employees, because you can train employees all you want, but you train them on a Friday and they come back on a Monday, they may or may not remember anything that you told them. And so you want to have those instructions written out right on the forms. We've also used this as an accountability tool. We used to have, before we had people start initialing for who did the counting and who was responsible for the quality of the harvest and who was on the crew, we were having tremendous trouble getting the right counts of stuff. We'd say we need 124 heads of lettuce. And people would go out and they'd come back in, and there might be 118 or there might be 145. And so they're either wasting time or else they have to go back out and get more. And we went through this, and when we instituted this accountability system as part of getting ready for the gaps, all of a sudden all the numbers started coming in right just because we had people initial. I've never had to go back to somebody now and say, it says here there you are 124, but there were actually 145. That just stopped immediately. Interesting. And I thought I had fairly responsible people, but it never hurts to make them a little bit more responsible. The other funny thing that this does is when you have to do this yourself, I'm a little bit more careful now too. We also want things to be in line with our workflow. And so we're always looking for ways when there is something that we need to document or information that we need to get, how can we make that part of what we're already doing? So for example, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this harvest sheet later on, but this is we have what we need to harvest, and then we have the goal here. This is something that's already going out to the field. We're already working with this document. So now we say, well, what else can we tag on to this document? Now this is where you get into a little bit of wasted paper, because this bottom half may or may not get filled out. We only use one page of this a day. But again, if we can use one piece of paper a day and increase our workflow, that seems like a small price to pay, rather than keeping a continuous log of our harvest so we don't waste a row. And then the other thing that we're always looking for is, can we make it a little bit fun? You'll notice that the papers that we have that are colored on our farm, we got rid of all the pastels and went for the Astro Brights, because it's just a little bit, it brightens things up and it makes it a little bit more fun than that. So we're always trying to find a way, how can we make this more interesting, more engaging for people? So here's the challenge that we have when somebody comes in and asks us to do record keeping, right? Because that inevitably it's going to fall on one person's shoulders, and who's that going to be? You, okay? And already, you are by default, you're the food safety director, you're the bookkeeper, you're the organic compliance officer, but you're also what? The plumber, the farmer, the carpenter, the mechanic, and everything else. So asking for more work to come in is just going to be, it becomes more. We talked a little bit about the collecting process and do. One of the first things, so collecting information. This is a wonderful tool. They call it a hipster PDA. I like to call it my Amish PDA. But it's just a bunch of note cards with a binder clip on it. I have a nice colored binder clip because with that whole fun thing. But it's the little things, right? Carry that in your shirt pocket. Get a good pen. I found that when I went out and bought a nice $16 Fisher Space pen, that suddenly I quit losing pens. I've had the same pen for 1.5 years now, okay? And before that, I never had a pen because it'd always fall out of my pocket. But you get one that's got a good clip on it, and you want to carry that everywhere. That becomes a great tool. Anytime that you see something that you need or want to record, you can write it down. Bugs in field 21. You write bugs in field 21. Hey, now you're observing. You were asking about the organic farm plan earlier. So they're going to ask you, what do you do to monitor for pests? Well, we walk through the field and we monitor for pests. Well, then now you've just proved that you're monitoring for pests when you write down there's bugs in field 21 in the broccoli. So, and then the great thing about that is you don't necessarily have to decide what you're going to do about it, because at the end of the day, you take the thing and you throw it in your inbox. And then every day, you want to process that inbox, okay? And now you're going to take that information and file it in a way that you're going to get it back out in the way you're going to use it. So again, if I had bugs in field 21, I might add to my to-do list, then I need to spray the broccoli in field 21. And at that point, then I take the card and throw it away, because I've logged that in a place that I'm going to come back and get it later. And part of that then is to batch that work and knowing how you've got things organized. Now, I use a computerized list manager called ToodleDo. It's an online program. I think it's a free program. But so I can kind of batch things. I can say, well, this is all the field work that needs to be done. This is all the tractor work. This is all the hand weeding. So I can have different categories for that, and I can keep those lists organized in ways. For the bookkeeping system, I take things and I organize it by how it's going to get entered into my QuickBooks bookkeeping program. So I put all the receipts for the Visa card in one place, and I put all the receipts for the checks and the debit card, which are off of the same account, into another folder. And that way those things are ready and waiting for me when I'm ready to actually do that work. Another great tool for record keeping and capturing information is email. And especially if you learn how to use the search function. And Outlook has a search function just like this, but Gmail is fantastic for doing search. And what we'll do is Ben and I email stuff back and forth all the time, not necessarily even something that requires an action, but it becomes a place that we've documented a certain event. And then, because we can find it again by just doing a search on field records, we actually have a phrase that we use for the log of unusual occurrences. It's a LUOC, which is basically anything that we don't have a form for. We send a LUOC to each other. And we type in LUOC. So if we need to pull up all of the LUOCs for the last year, I can just type LUOC into the search bar, and all of those will pop up. And that becomes part of my food safety records then. That's particularly where we use that. But it can also become your complaint log for your organic certification. There's a number of other functions that can have. So just thinking about how to leverage that electronics. And the wonderful thing here is, again, I'm not spending any time filing. All I'm doing is spending time putting the information in. And then I can grab it out later, leveraging the computers, because computers make it so that you don't have to organize things in a spatial fashion. You can organize them more by their content and in multiple different forms. You don't have to just have it all in one folder or one location. When we get in receipts, then we, if it's something that's major and not an ongoing purchase, we put this service cross on, and this is something we use a lot on our farm. Nobody can ever remember what's supposed to go in which corner of the service cross. This is something I learned from UPS. They do this. You see this when they tried to deliver a package and they couldn't bring it to you. They put that cross on it. They actually have something they mark in each one of those quadrants. That's part of the training process with them. So we write down, okay, what is it? What are we going to use it for? What's the date? And then what's the payment method? And it doesn't really matter what gets put in where, but this way my employees know if they've gone out and bought something for the farm, or they're processing they get in a shipment, and so they've got the packing slip there. They know that they throw this service cross on there. There's 4 things that they need to fill out. It doesn't really matter what goes where or how they indicate it. They just need to get that information on there so that we know what's going on. Turns out we use this all over the farm. Now, this is something that crops up in lots of different places. And then also thinking about what's the appropriate level of detail that you need to get. So I spend a lot of money on gas right now, and my girlfriend lives up about 3 hours north in Wisconsin, so I'm always driving back and forth. But you know that when you're a farmer, right, you've got your car, you never go anywhere unless it's a farm errand. So I never actually go to visit my girlfriend unless I'm running farm errands on the way, and that way I can write it off, right? So don't tell her that, though, okay? So we buy a fair amount of gas on the farm. We just write the word C-gas up there. That's car gas. That's how I categorize that. I don't need to do a service cross for that. It's pretty darn clear what it is. I only buy gas with one credit card. So we just write C-gas and we're good to go. And then, of course, that information then is getting entered into QuickBooks. I really like QuickBooks. It's a more robust program than most people need, but that means that it's going to be robust enough for what you need. It's also the industry standard. People are always looking for the alternative, especially if you're an organic leftist hippie type. That means that you don't want to do what the establishment thing to do is. So this is the establishment bookkeeping system, but that means that every accountant in the world knows how to use QuickBooks, and it works with everything. And then using a lot of color wherever we can on the farm. We've run out of colors, which is a little bit frustrating, but I mentioned that we try to go with bright stuff, but it does make it really easy and distinct to identify things from far away and go, we need the pink form or we need the yellow form. And especially in those early weeks when we bring employees onto the farm, for me, right, the difference between harvest and packing is pretty darn clear. But it's really nice to be able to say to somebody, grab the pink clipboard and bring it out to the field. It's also really good if you're working with a 3-year-old. I mentioned the whole organization thing, right? Organizing at the appropriate level at the front end, so that you're not so tightly organized that you spend a lot of time at the front end trying to figure out exactly where something goes. And I mentioned I'm a little bit anal and I really like my system, so I've gone through every filing system there is in the book, right? I used to use a numbering system that was keyed to an outline. I read that in one of Joel Salatin's books a long time ago. I hope he's taken that part out by now. But then we also used a bunch of hierarchical systems, and what inevitably would happen there is that we'd have a pile. It was the 2-file pile, right? What's the 2-file pile? It's just a pile of crap that you should have taken care of, and that you know that you need to take care of, that you're going to take care of on a rainy day when you don't have anything better to do. Nobody ever doesn't have anything better to do than filing, right? So we've learned to just have it as simple as possible, and our basic filing system on the farm now is strictly alphabetical. So we just go A to Z. Again, for the bookkeeping, I file everything by month. So the month that I enter it into QuickBooks, it goes in that file. So anything that I processed the day before yesterday into QuickBooks would have gone in the January file. Anything I processed from yesterday on forward is going to go in the February file. And then if I need to find anything, I can go back and I can track it through QuickBooks. I can say, okay, I know that what I need to figure out how much fuel did I buy this year. I bought it from Hovey's. Okay, so I look up Hovey, and it goes, oh yeah, there was a receipt in February, there's going to be a receipt in June, and there's going to be a receipt in September. I used to be kind of tight about getting them into the right month, and then I realized that it really didn't matter if I got it into the right month. I just needed to get it into an adjacent month. So like if I'm processing, when I do my bookkeeping on Monday, if I've got a receipt in there from January, I'm just going to put it in the February file. Because I know that if it's not in the January file, it's going to be in the February file. And that's good enough for me for the amount of times I actually have to go back and get that information out of my paper-based filing system. So what we track then, we're tracking, and I think that everything that we track on the farm comes down to 3 things. It comes down to tracking inflows, it comes down to tracking outflows, and then the actions in between. What happened between things coming onto the farm, going off the farm. So we need a way to track our inputs, we need a way to track our time, we need a way to track our finances, we need a way to track our activities on the farm, and then we need a way to track our outputs. Okay? And then, again, we need to kind of tie all those things together. So now we're going to talk about how we actually do that. So inflows, then, this is going to be anything coming onto the farm. Okay? So things that come onto the farm all get a lot code. And this was a silly little thing that we figured out a couple years ago. We started, instead of trying to say, oh yeah, that was batch 102575623 from Vermont Compost, which never really tracked back to the invoice that we got anyways from them, was we decided that anything that comes onto the farm, we were going to put a tag on it. And we use our distinctive Rock Spring Farm lot code system here. And this is how we do it. We have a lot of things on the farm that we're holding over from year to year. That includes crops. We do a lot of perennial crops because of the fresh herb business that we're in. So we track the year. So I think this is actually today. The year is 2012, so that's the last digit of that. 034, it's the 34th day of the year. So we went with that. You could do a month and a day. We did this because of our lot coding system on our vegetables going out. I don't really want somebody to know that I washed the rutabagas on December 15th and sold them the rutabagas on January 15th, because produce managers get kind of uppity about that stuff. They're like, oh, these rutabagas aren't fresh, But rutabagas, it doesn't matter when you wash the rutabaga and when you sell the rutabaga, It's still going to be a rutabaga, and it's still just as good as it ever was, which is really good, right? But I like rutabagas. So we went with the day of the year because it was just a little bit more obscure, obfuscation. And then the step in the process, I'm going to talk about that in just a moment, and then the batch. And then what we do then is anytime that there's a handling step on our farm, so anytime something moves from one place to another. So for example, if a seed gets planted, the lot code gets changed. If something gets harvested and then it gets washed and packed, the lot code gets changed. And what we do then is we increase that step code. So that's going to be the 5th digit. We just increase that by 1. We change the date to the current date, and then the batch generally stays the same unless we're combining batches together. So this is how this works on our farm. Johnny's. Oh, so you know where I got this picture? This came out of our files, right? We used to have to, the MOSA, the Midwest Organic Services Association, that's our certifier. I work for MOSES, the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Services, an unfortunate confluence of names. But MOSA, our certifier, used to make me keep my seed packets, right? I'm a vegetable farmer. How many seed packets do you end up with at the end of the year? Like, 5,000, and they're taking up space. And then you've got the cans of seed that you buy, like the shallot seeds that come in the cans. And then you're trying to peel the label off. And then what do you do with the label? We just started taking pictures of everything. We take pictures of it, and we throw it away. We throw away the packets now. We ran it by them. They said that was just fine. And these all go into the computer. Now, the great thing is you take a picture of something, and what does the picture have in it? It's got a date code. Even if you don't have the date that appears at the bottom of the screen, it's got a date that's hard-coded into it as part of the file is the creation date. So now we've generated a system. We're instantly documenting. It documents when we received it. It's actually better documentation than just having the seed packet, right? So here's how this works. This is Red Bull onion. So so for all of our crops then are by variety. So RB for Red Bull, ON for onion, and then we have that lot code. So we received this on the 61st day of 2001. So that would have been about February 29th, or March 1st, I guess. And then seeds, when they come in, always get step 0 because we haven't actually done anything with them yet. So we call that step 0. And then batch 1. Now, if I bought some Red Bull from Johnny's and some Red Bull from High Mowing, then I might have a batch 1 and a batch 2 out of that. So that helps me to keep track of what seeds came from where as I move through this process. Now, I've taken a picture, so the picture has all the information on it. It's got the Johnny's lot code. It's got the seed size. It's got the germination rates on there. So I've now documented all of that stuff. I don't need to write that down every time I use these seeds. The only thing I need to write down is RBON 106101. By the way, we put the variety first. We used to put the crop first, but we put the variety first because usually when we're trying to when employees need to go in and look for a code on a flat of transplants, that's the variety is the thing that they need to be looking at first. They can tell whether it's broccoli or not. They need to know which variety of broccoli it is. So we went for that one first. We take that same code, and I apologize about not having pulled together an example that's going to be fully consistent throughout. So these are sample shots here, so I don't have the same lot codes everywhere. But we take that code and we write it down on the packing slip that we got from Johnny's. So now we've tracked the seeds to the packing slip that it was on. The organic certifier loves this. When they get my inspector on, that packing slip then goes into my inbox. Okay, so it's going to get processed again into this. So that the packing slip from Johnny's, we pay for everything from Johnny's with the Visa card. That's going to go into the Visa slot. Okay? I pay off my balance on your credit cards every month, right? That's a good thing to do because then you get points. But if you don't do it, the points aren't worth it at all. So you got to pay it off every month. But if you can manage that, it's a really handy thing to have. Now, when I go to plant those seeds in the greenhouse, then my greenhouse planting form here, which you can see, it's got instructions here. It says number of flats planned, actual number completed, flat type, seeds per cell. Which soil mix do we use? Vermont soil mix 2.1. Okay, that's an indicator on our farm that you're using soil mix plus our mycorrhizal stuff that we use that we add into the soil. mix. And then what are you actually doing? The tool or the method. So that means, are you supposed to use the speedy seeder? Are you supposed to do it by hand? Are you supposed to be sticking the plants? Are you supposed to be potting them up? So this becomes very clear instructions for our employees as to what to do. And then they're recording the number completed there. But then we write down the input code. So here's the lot number for the seeds. If we were using seeds from 2 different lot codes, we'd write down both of those lot codes and batch them together. Okay? And then down here we have the who's seeded, what time do they start, what time do they finish, total time. And so again, we've got an accountability tool here if there is a problem with this. And that accountability tool, again, I want to say it's not for going back and saying, you're a bad person and you screwed up. A lot of times it's for saying, hey, what went wrong and let us solve that problem. That's an important attitude to have as an employer.
The planning code on the right side?
That's next.
Got it.
Okay. I have a slide about that, so I can't talk about it yet. So we do the same thing when we receive herbs from Jacob's farm. We tag them. We actually use a price tag gun there because we happen to have a price tag gun out for other reasons on the farm. For our outbound lot codes, get price tagged on each of us 6 packs of clamshell herbs that we send out. So this is the same thing. These would have been, again, herbs on 2012. This would have been the 25th day, so that would have been January 25th. Anything that comes in from Jacob's farm gets a step of 9. That's just what we've decided to do there. And then it's batch 1. And then we take that same tag and we put it on the packing slip from Jacob's farm. So now we've provided tracking for where that comes from. And then Jacob's farm's job is to be able to, if we say, look, on the bill of lading for this date that was based on sales order such and so, you need to be able to track that back to your day and field on which it was harvested. So that's their job as a producer. So we have that input code there. So we're going to run that input code, and here's what we did. So this is Giant of Italy, and it's parsley. So it's P-A-G-I. We do still write out the variety and the crop over here because that's helpful to our employees so they know what they're actually. I know that PA is parsley and that GI is Giant of Italy, but they don't necessarily have that same cue. And we want to make them feel like they're involved in the process instead of just part of the factory. And then so that planning code 109811. So 1098 being the date on the seeds, and step 1, batch 1. Actually, this must have been potting up. So it was already at step 1. So then we moved that to the second 1122, step 2, batch 1. There we go. So that's the planting code. So we just moved it through this process here. So, and we call that the planting code because then that's what's going to turn around and go on the tags. And the nice thing about this planting code then is instead of writing out Giant of Italy, now we've just got a 10-digit code, 4 letters, 6 numbers that gets put on that tag. So we happen to print our tags out on a computer because I've got a label printer for the herb business, and so it just makes sense for us when we're doing large quantities of things to run those plant tags through the printer. But it is a lot faster for people to write those numbers down as well. And that also means then people are being consistent because there's a right way to write it down instead of G of I, or instead of something that has somebody leaving the year off of a tag and then not knowing whether you're working with the time plants that were potted up this year or the time plants that were potted up last year. And it's easy for me to know whether I'm working with time plants that are a year old or not. I can tell because are they root bound, are they woody, are they nasty? But if I've got an employee who's only been on the farm for 3 weeks, they probably don't have that same level of sensitivity to, is this year's plant or last year's plant? And then we do the same thing with our transplant record. So here, we've got the input code. So that would be the plant. That would be the number that's on the plant tag here. Okay, and then we have a new code when it goes into the field. So that becomes another step in the process. Now, if something had gone through multiple potting up steps, it might end up with step codes up to 3 or 4 or 5. In fact, we grow our rosemary in pots in the greenhouse, and so that regularly moves up as we move them up we stick them, and then they go into a 2-inch pot, and then they go into a 6-inch pot, and then they go into a 1-gallon pot. Each one of those is a step in the process, and we can trace that back through and go, yeah, this plant is this old. It was been in this pot for this long. Okay. And again, you'll notice, things like the field number there, the bed number. A system on our farm, we always count beds from the downhill side. Closer to the creek, that's bed 1 in any given field. And then you work your way away from there. And beds are defined by where the tractor tires are. We're not, as much as I want to be out there like GPSing things, we're not out there GPSing things. We're just counting beds. And then the number of rows that you use, what's the spacing, and then what's the transplanter that you're using. In this case, it was actually by hand. And then we keep track of the total time as well. So I want to talk a little bit then about money, because now even with organic certification, you're required to track money stuff. With GAPS, you're required to track money stuff too, right? You have to know how much you sold, how much you took in, where you sold your product, who you sold it to. You also have to know things like, sometimes the GAPS inspector wanted to see that I had receipts for the tsunami wash water sanitizer that we use, so that she could evaluate whether we were using an appropriate amount throughout the year, right? So I had to go pull those out. So again, what did I do? I went to QuickBooks. I did a search in QuickBooks on Ecolab, because that's who we buy our tsunami from, and then that popped up the 3 times that we bought it, and then I went into the receipts and I pulled those out. So this all fits into the whole realm. All 3 of these do kind of run together. And again, I want to emphasize that we want to do this for you. And QuickBooks, this is a place I feel like they really fall down. Okay, is you go in and you set up a farm business in QuickBooks, and this is the chart of accounts that you get, and it's not organized. It's just crap. Okay, it's not useful. You can see. They've got things like bank service charges right next to car and truck expenses, right next to chemicals purchased, right next to computer and internet expenses. Those things don't bear any relationship to each other. Why would you put them next to each other? Because it's in alphabetical order. What the hell kind of an organizational system is that? Who cares? Okay? So, and again, we don't want to organize stuff for the tax man. Why would we organize things for the tax man? How often do you do your taxes? Once a year. You can sit down at that point and go, oh yeah, this funny little category that I categorize this way, that actually counts as a supply, and put it in there. They only give you, 17 different ways to categorize your taxes, all your expenses anyways. That's not a useful level of detail unless all you do is a chemical corn and bean farmer, and who the hell wants to be that? So what we've done then is to break down all of our income and expenses into sub-accounts. So we begin to categorize things in ways that are useful to us. So for example, with our farm, we broke up our farming income and our non-sales income, because what I really care about is, am I making money on the farm? All those government payments, naval telephone cooperative dividends, those, yes, I have to count them as income, I have to track them, but those don't really fit into what the overall profit picture is on my farm and how much money I'm making on my carrots, right? It doesn't help me with that. So we broke down our income to, things that we sold to growers, things that we sold through the CSA, through the farmer's market, through wholesale. And then for us, because the herbs are such a large part of our business and have a very distinctive flow of both of income and of expense, there's a lot of things that are associated with those herbs that aren't associated with anything else. We wanted to break those out so we can subcategorize these things. We can still see then how much money we made from farming, and in fact, up above here, I can see how much income I made. QuickBooks does all that math for me. By having this broken down, I can see things at the level of detail that's actually useful for me. Am I selling more herbs or less herbs than I was selling last year? That's something that I want to know at the end of every month. Because if I'm not selling enough herbs, I need to do something about it. And if I am selling more herbs, that means I'm probably going to need to order clamshells sooner than I thought I was going to need to order clamshells. So we do the same thing with our expenses. We have this nested structure. This wasn't a great example because I pulled it off in just 1 month, so it's missing a lot of the detail and how those things might be fleshed out. But I want to show you, for example, labor. This is one of my pet peeves. People who put workers' compensation insurance and they put it under insurance. That's not related. That's not an overhead expense of running your business. That's an expense that's directly related to the cost of labor on your farm. Okay? So are things like perks for employees and payroll processing. You wouldn't do those things if you didn't have labor on your farm. So you want to pull all of the things that are related to labor into labor. Payroll taxes goes with the payroll. You want to know wages, payroll taxes, that goes into payroll. How does that differ from casual labor, contract labor? My health insurance goes under a labor cost. That's an expense. Now, and this is one of those funny things, right? I don't even know what the status is on being able to deduct health insurance, but I know a number of years ago when I started getting it, you couldn't deduct it as an expense as a small business person. So we had to, because I'm a sole proprietor and not a corporation, so that means that I don't, how is it that corporations are people and then they get to pay off their health insurance, but I'm a person and I don't get to deduct my health insurance? That doesn't quite make sense. But then so we put the health insurance under there, even though it wasn't a deductible expense. And it drove my accountant crazy because she said, well, now I just have to pull it back out of there. I said, well, that's what I pay you for. I want it in there because that's a real expense that I have. Change it for the tax form. Okay, this is an expense of my doing business. Now I've actually changed this. I put in my own wages under there. Even though I take it as an owner's draw, I put it up there as an expense because that's an expense. I deserve to get paid for running my farm. So we put that in as an expense instead of as a draw. And then when I have to do a report for the bank or when I have to do something for the tax man, I pull that back out and put it in the owner's draw category. So the other thing that we did then, we had started breaking things out this way, but a couple years ago, and this has been one of the more useful things that we've done in our bookkeeping system, we actually organized everything into 6 different categories. So we got infrastructure, every expense on the farm is either infrastructure, labor, machinery and equipment, operations, which is the things that it takes to produce the vegetables and get them sold, overhead, and then sales and promotion. And this began to give us a really clear idea of where we were spending our money on our farm and how that was going. So this is something then as we continue to adapt our chart of accounts over the last couple of years, some things get changed and sometimes we break out expenses at different levels of detail depending on what I'm interested in finding out about in a given year. But from year to year to year, I can look at this stuff because if something was in infrastructure last year, it's going to be in infrastructure this year. And I can compare across years and see what the impact is going to be and how things are coming along.
What's the difference between operations and overhead?
Operations is what it takes to produce crops. Overhead are expenses that I would have whether I was producing crops or not. So for
Variable cost.
yeah, basically operations would be variable. Overhead is going to be fixed, more or less. Most expenses aren't actually fixed over time, but that's another lecture. Yeah.
Is it okay to ask a question?
Yeah.
So,
I'll tell you if it's not. How about that?
well, maybe later. I
Go.
need a little more detail about some of these categories. Like, what does some of them mean? But I don't want to take too much time. Like, operations, what's that mean?
Okay, so the question was, what do these different categories mean? So operations that's the day-to-day operations on the farm. So that's going to be things like buying seeds, buying potting soil, expenses for fuel, expenses for delivery. Those are all expenses that we incur because we're in the business that we're in and we're producing the things that we produce. Overhead is things that we would have whether we were in business or not. So, yeah. Infrastructure then is going to be things that have to do with kind of buildings and grounds kind of stuff. Putting salt on the driveway is an infrastructure expense. Hiring somebody to mow the lawn or to clean the bathrooms in the packing house. That if I'm not having employees do that, that's an infrastructure expense. Overhead might include things like my internet service, my cell phone. That's an overhead expense. I'm going to have that whether I'm selling a lot of vegetables or whether I've gone into the rabbit business. Okay, I'm still going to have a cell phone, so that goes under that overhead expense.
Is that also like insurance?
Yes, yeah. But again, that's only the insurance. That would be my umbrella policy and my liability. That wouldn't be my workers' comp insurance because that's different. It wouldn't be my health insurance because that's a cost of labor. That's associated with labor. And because labor is such a big expense, and you can see, this is only on a monthly basis, so those numbers are kind of, they're meaningless. I don't know when I took this, and I didn't take it meaning to have anything implied. But on our farm, labor, I think we run at about 41%. It's a tremendous expense. And that's before you put my wages into it. So, and I think that's true of a lot of farms, that you run about 40% of your expenses going into labor. A lot of vegetable farms, I should say. So then we have a need to track actions and to track time. So this is, and I was inspired by Angelic Organics. I went to visit them in 3 or 4 years ago, and they're up in northern Illinois. They have something like 2,000 CSA members. It's kind of an insanely large organic CSA farm there. Farmer John's the guy with the pink boa who did the films a couple years ago. And they had these things, they call them directives. And this was their term for instructions that they were giving to their employees to do a certain task. And they really got into very specifics about how the task was supposed to be performed and what was the desired outcome. So we came back from there and we created this form. Well, we started without having a field map. And so this is one farm here, and then I've got some rental ground that we farm. And I think we have something like 80 fields that we farm all together. And they're on, some of them are on contours, some of them are a long ways from the farm. This one takes about 25 minutes to get down to, so when you get there, you better have the right equipment to get done what you need to get done. And they're all over the place. And I had a guy, so we started off with these directives, and then I had a guy go and plow up the peas. And I said, but I told you to do field 13. He said, well, I did do field 13. I said, no, that was field 12. And why, again, I'm always a little bit amazed at people who didn't look and go, oh, there's rows of peas in this field. Maybe I shouldn't plow it up. But, he was just following directions. He thought. I've had over 100 employees in the last 12 years, and I've seen everything. I'm convinced that there is nothing more. God, I don't think so. I mean, I've had the guy that said, if I was standing up on top of that hill there, I could take you out. He was the special operations guy. The big fat special operations guy. Everybody knows this. There's one in every town, right? I've had there was the lesbian tractor driver that I had to bail out of jail. We've done. I've had people steal stuff. I've also had some great employees over the years. Now. The guy that plowed up the peas was not the brightest bulb in the box. But I realized that, okay, so one of the things that I like to do is I always say a complaint is just a project waiting for definition. Okay? So if I have a problem with something that one of my employees did, the first thing to do is to get rid of the stupid employees. And then the second thing to do is to figure out how to make your employees less stupid. And the Japanese have a concept called poka-yoke. And it's a nice way of saying idiot-proofing. It basically means that you make things so that it's impossible to make a mistake. So you stack the cards as much as possible where you need them. So we put the maps right on here. And you'll see as we go through, we actually highlight now when I'm making my plan. Now, I created this for employees that were having a hard time finding their way around on the farm and were making mistakes all the time. And so I put the maps on there, and then I started using the highlighter to make it really clear. And then I realized that if I did this for myself, I actually had a much higher chance of success as well. That when I go out to the field now, I take this on a clipboard, I know what to do, I can see very clearly what needs to be done, I've thought about what order I should do the work in, I've considered all of these different factors, and now when I go out, I got those earbuds from Gempler's that you can, they're like having regular earplugs in, so they take care of the sound, but then you can pipe your MP3 player into them. So I get on the tractor, I crank the Jimmy Buffett tunes, and I just go, because I don't have to think anymore. All the instructions are right there on the clipboard. I just have to do what I told myself to do. It's nice. Here's what we'll do. Once a week, I try to get through the whole farm, and I start writing, I just write down. This becomes part of my monitoring, right? I've got the map so that I always know what field I'm in, because sometimes even I get confused about what field I'm in. So I've got the map, and I just start writing down what needs to be done, and I categorize things. This is what needs to be done with the budding basket weeder. Here's some one-row cultivating. Here's what needs to be done with the sweeps. This is what needs, there's this deer fence that needs to be put up on field 24. Look, exclamation point, that's probably an indicator that I've seen some deer activity in there. It's not just that it needs to happen. So that becomes, do I monitor? So one of the questions in a gaps audit is, do you monitor for the presence of livestock and wildlife in your fields? Yes, I do, right there. So we've taken care of that. I don't need a form that says I'm monitoring for wildlife. It's monitored here. So then I bring this back in to the house, and I sit down in the office, and I start putting all of this information onto other directives. So this is a very loose directive. This is our rototilling directive here. So we've done this with every major piece of equipment. I saw you leaning in there, so I made that slide for you. So on every major piece of equipment, we've gone through and we've got instructions about what sorts of results we might want to have, and we figured out ways to define those that make sense to our employees. So we've got the date. So this was on the 297th day of 2001. Ben didn't write down the tractor, and he didn't write down that it was him. But the fields that need to be done and what order to do them in. If you've ever sent somebody out to do tractor work, and then you said, I want you to do these 10 fields, and then at the end of the day, they come back in and they didn't get one field done, and they leave and they go home for the day, and you read your kids the bedtime story, and you go out to seed those peas at night, and that one field that you actually needed to get done didn't get done because it was the one that, for some reason, they didn't get to, then you need to tell them what order to do the work in. So we lay that out. It's not necessarily numerical order. We write down the objective. And rather than having to write down the objective each time, we basically figured out that there are 4 things that you want to do when you're rototilling. So, and we've done the same thing for flail mowing. We've done the same thing for subsoiling. All of this information is there for each of these. We make notes, again, especially if I'm working with somebody who's less experienced as a tractor operator, I'm going to tell them about what settings they need to have, how deep to till, whether the gate on the back of the tiller should be up or down. To me, this is all second nature. But to other people, I mean, you put the gate up when you want to kick the weeds up into the air. You put the gate down when you want a more finished surface that's been beat up a little bit more. How fast do you want we have our tiller has a gearbox on it so we can adjust the speeds. And then any special instructions. And then down at the bottom, we have a checklist, okay? And it's for hooking up the equipment. Because, again, for me, I've been doing this now for 23 years. I know how to hook up a rototiller. I can do it in my sleep. But remembering that rototiller, it's got the PTO spinning and everything spinning, and the whole thing likes to offset to the right. And so my employees who I had working on the tractor oftentimes would forget to offset the whole thing to the left to make up for the inertial motion. So we put that on there, hitch offset to the left slightly to compensate for inertial effects. Okay? Now, I can't send somebody out and say, go hook up the rototiller without training them to hook up the rototiller, but this provides a reminder. It's just like a pre-flight checklist that an airplane pilot would use to say, did I do all of the things that I needed to do? Again, when I fill this out, I remember, we were having problems. I'm a lazy greaser. Okay? You're supposed to grease your implement every time you go out. Well, we started having some equipment that began to break down because it wasn't getting greased. We had a couple of incidents on the farm. We put that on there. This is my reminder that every time I go out to use the rototiller, I need to take the 2 minutes to take the grease gun and put some grease in the zerks. And so now it actually happens. I've idiot-proofed things for myself as well as for my employees. And then we give some target speeds here, and then we have time start, time end, total time on the job. That helps us to actually figure out what's our cost of production at the end of the year. I don't do anything with this as I go along, but now I've collected the data, and it's real data that says that when you did this many fields, this is how long it took. Because I know how big those fields are, I can figure out how many acres per hour we did. And if I've tracked how many hours I put on the tractor, now I can actually figure out what was the cost of doing an acre of rototilling. And then if I know that, I can figure out how much when I tilled an acre for carrots, how much did that cost me to do, and how much do I need to increase my price on my carrots to account for all of the field work that I've done. So it begins to feed back in for doing deeper analysis so that we can begin to run a more profitable operation if we actually understand our true cost of production. This also becomes my activity log then for my organic certification. So again, multiple purposes behind this. So for spraying, I don't do a lot of spraying on the farm, so we didn't develop a directive for spraying. And I'm the only one that sprays, and I've kind of got it down pat. But I know, hey, see the service cross up there? It doesn't have the same information, but it's just my reminder, like, how many things can I put in here? There's got to be at least 3 or 4 that I need to fill out. And so then, start time, end time, what did I spray, and then what fields did I do? And then how much, how much water did I use so that I can kind of figure out. That lets me go back and say, if I'm 2 tablespoons per 3 gallons, how much water did I use? That tells me what rate I applied that at, which is something they're going to ask you on your organic certification paperwork. I always hate that question. How much dipel did you apply on field 13? I don't know, but now at least I can do the math. Now in my certification paperwork, I tell them that I apply it at label rate. If they want to ask more questions, I can figure it out. But I figure that's good enough, right? I did it at the label rate. And again, if they want more info, I can document it. I can show them that I can document it. And usually with the organic certification inspector, if I show him that I can document something, he quits asking so many questions because he really doesn't want to do the math. And he doesn't want to sit there while I do the math. You had a question in the back.
Yeah, so about how many sheets per day are you having to fill out here?
Depends on the day.
About.
You know, might be 3 or 4. Sometimes it's 10 or 12. So what? Okay, here, look.
Recycled paper.
It's recycled paper. And it takes me, but see, this is the thing. It takes me a couple of minutes. And because I'm doing this work in advance, because I'm laying out a plan, especially with, I mean, look, I sat down at the beginning of the day or the beginning of the week, and I say that I know that this is what needs to get done. And when it's time to do it, I can look at this and say, okay, I'm going to start here, and I'm going to move through this work. And I don't have to think about it. I'm just doing it. And because it's got all the instructions here, I can hand this off to somebody in a way that I never could before. So I'm able to delegate the responsibility. Delegating jobs to other people takes time. It takes management time to be able to do that effectively. And this just serves as a reinforcement tool to say, hey, remember, this is what we talked about you doing, instead of somebody having to keep it up in their brain or counting on them to write down an appropriate level of detail in the pocket notebook that everybody carries on the farm. I'm sorry, she had a question in the back.
How do you synthesize all this, and when do you do it, and
Oh, see, that's...
Repeat it.
enter it onto the computer?
Thank you.
And all of that?
You guys have signs to repeat the questions. I like that. I'm going to write that down. So how do I synthesize this? I don't. See, that's the thing. I could spend a lot of time entering all of this into a computer program, okay? But I don't. At the end of the year, I decide what information do I need. Because this is fulfilling multiple purposes, because it's instructions to me or to my employees, because it's a log of my activities for organic certification and for the GAPS program, and for those reasons, that's sufficient for me to do this paperwork, to keep track of this stuff. If I need information out of here at the end of the year, it's filed, and I pull it back out again. And I'm going to show you how we file all this stuff is well, I guess I don't have a picture of it right there. All of this stuff gets filed it's a field log. It's a field directive. So it just goes in a folder labeled field directives, and it goes in more or less chronological order. And then if I need information at the end of the year, I can say, well, okay, how much, what did we do in field 93? Well, I can go through all of those and all of these things, and I look for anything that's got field 93 listed up here or highlighted on here, and I pull that stuff out. And that becomes what I did in field 93. For the most part, the certifier doesn't care whether I rototilled field 93 2 times or 3 times. They aren't asking for that level of detail. They are asking for this level of detail. What fields did I apply dipel to? They care about that. So that's where I'm going to, but again, at the end of the year, when I do my certification application, if they require me to document what I actually did by field, then I can write that stuff down. The funny thing is, my certifier, they only require a plan. I actually never submit a report to my certifier that says, this is what I did on those fields. I can prove what I did on the fields, and they can see that I can demonstrate what I did on the fields if there was a question. But I've actually never been questioned about that.
Just on the breakdown of categories of field directives, and I guess the notion that, if you're a big farm, you might have one person gets the irrigation field directive, one gets the fertilizer field directive.
Yep.
If you're 2 people are running in, you take 8 different directives with you in the field. Fertilizing, subsoiling, tilling,
And there are some things that we've combined. Like we have a directive for doing what we call initial bed prep. So our initial bed prep process is to go through with a yeoman subsoil plow and then to till 3 inches deep with the rototiller. And that's all on one directive because that generally is happening on the same day with one person. So that's a job that has its own set of rules around it. But again, this is what works for us as the farm we're on, and I just want to say, for me, this has had incredible benefits for being able to do things more or less on autopilot that I used to have to do with full brain functioning. And I would much rather go out to the field and be running on autopilot because I make less mistakes that way if I set up the job in advance. It's kind of like this morning. I got up tomorrow. My flight leaves at 6 o'clock in the morning, so I got to be on the bus out of the airport at 5. So when I got out of bed this morning, I set the alarm clock for 4 o'clock tomorrow morning because I want to take care of that now. I want to take care of that when I'm smart. Tonight I'm going to have a beer, and I'm not going to be so smart after I have a beer. Well, I might have 3 beers, and then I definitely won't be so smart. But I'm smarter when I'm sitting at my desk doing the planning work than I am when I'm out in the hot field and I'm sweaty and my son is texting me because he needs a ride from town and Ben's trying to get a hold of me on the radio because there's some problem with deliveries, and all of a sudden, I don't know what's going on. Look, again, spraying BT, I do that at 5:30 in the morning. This is not my optimal functioning time of day. Okay? So I want to sit down the night before and say what I want to do. I have a plan, and then I show up in the field, and all I have to do is crank some widgets. And that makes it a lot easier. Yes, sir?
When you're using this to figure out your costs, time spent doing like the time you took to till one field or the weed carrots or whatever, don't you need to plug that all into a computer program to have that be useful?
Because I'm really anal, but I'm not that anal. So what I would do is I would sit down and I'd say, okay, well, we're doing rototilling, right? We're doing weed control rototilling. How long does it take to do an acre of weed control rototilling? So I'd figure that out based on the information that I've collected. And then I would just say, well, I know that I weed control rototilled in the carrots 3 times before I planted the carrots. So at that many hours per acre times that many hours per acre times that many acres of carrots, that equals this many hours of tractor work. So I don't log all of this into a computer program. If I did that, I'd want to have everybody carrying iPhones on the farm, which I would like to do. But
And you do this sort of thing for like harvesting, like
yeah, and I'm gonna hit that in just a minute. So I'm actually gonna charge on ahead because I've only got another 15 minutes here, and I want to talk a little bit more about some of the gap stuff in addition to the field work information. So. This is something I learned from Angelic. This becomes our daily log of activities. Not everything gets a full-fledged directive. Okay, there are some things that just get done, and so we write those things get put on the whiteboard here, and then we also use the whiteboard for our cooler log. Now, if you go through one of these places that wants you to set up a plan for fulfilling the gaps, the good agricultural practices requirements, they'll tell you need to keep a cooler log, and they give you a piece of paper that's a big grid, and you fill out the cooler information on it every day. Now, why do you keep a cooler log? Make sure it's working, right? Well, when do you care if it's, first of all, when do you care if it's working? When it doesn't work, when you've got product. So I want people, now I happen to know if I call the refrigeration repair guy at 5 o'clock at night, he's coming tomorrow. If I call the refrigeration repair guy at 8 o'clock in the morning, he's coming that day. So we take our cooler logs in the morning. We have a set of opening activities that get done that we mark down as getting done. But we don't need it on a big piece of paper. We write it down every day on the whiteboard. So somebody's logging the data on the whiteboard, and we take a picture of that at the end of every day. That becomes our record of what we did on that day. And it's got the day, it's got the date code on it, it's got how many CSA boxes we're packing this week, it's got then a log of everything that we've done that day, and then we actually have a bigger this week place over here. This also becomes my accountability tool during greenhouse season. We have a place where on this board where somebody has to write down every week what's the level in the LP tank. Okay? And we always check the LP tank on Mondays and on Fridays. And so we'll have a line on here that says LP tank level. And people go out and they check that and it gets written down. And there's a big glaring hole that anybody can be responsible for filling. there. Because it's on the whiteboard, we've also democratized the information. It's not all hidden on a clipboard that may or may not be accessible to everybody or that somebody might be using. It's all right here out in the open. Everybody on the farm can see what needs to be done, and they can do it, and they can mark it off as being done. And then this is the last thing that happens at the end of every day. We take a picture, and we wipe the board clean of anything that no longer applies. And then that goes onto our computers. Our computers are backed up using Carbonite, so it's a continuous backup program. So we download from the camera once a week, gets downloaded to the computer, and that then gets backed up on Carbonite. So we've got the backup, but we've also got the data. Again, the note cards are a great way to keep information on what's happening on a daily basis. And then we also use this. This has become kind of our data center on the farm. So this is where we're keeping all of our logs, particularly with anything having to do with the harvest, wash, and pack process, is all contained right here. We keep the extra forms are here. The camera lives right on that shelf there. And then we've got our harvest, our packing, and our CSA forms there right next to the cooler logs, so that it's all just instantly accessible. These are these nice, we got these magnet hooks. I think we got those from Kempler's. They're like those rare earth magnets, but boy, they're stuck on there, and they can hold a 10-pound clipboard, no problem at all. You notice with these clipboards, too, we use these ones, well, they're like this. We found they're just a little bit more expensive than the regular ones. We buy plastic ones. I have a metal one that I keep for myself so that I know that it's mine, but we've learned to buy plastic because they don't warp like the cardboard ones do and then wobble on you. But if you use these, they take up less, this clip takes up less space than the standard clipboard clip, and you can fit it into a tighter space when you need to carry it with you. So, yeah, it's just been a lot easier to handle. So we do a lot of course tracking of time. We had an expensive time clock for a while that we'd slide a card through, and then it would upload to the ADP web server and stuff. We did that after we'd gone through years of trying to enter people's time into spreadsheets and calculate the hours. And my ex-partner used to kind of fudge the time, whether she liked the employee or not, and that never felt good or right. So I was listening to Minnesota Public Radio a couple of months ago, and they were talking about how iPads are now taking over the world and like threatening cash register operators because you can get an iPad cash register app for like $10, you know. So I thought, oh, I'll bet there's one for a time clock. So we got one for the time clock. I went out and I bought an iPod Touch for $200 in this time clock. And then what's cool here, so you check in, you check out for an employee, and then you can actually email the report, comes right to me. So actually at lunchtime today, I'm going to process payroll. Okay? Because I got the payroll report and it's right here and it does all the math for me. And so for $210, and actually if I had bought the thing on eBay like my son said I should have done, I probably would have got it a little bit cheaper. But I can get all of that information done, and that's going to last me for years. Okay? It's not just this isn't, I'm not paying $220 to get something done once, but now I do payroll every 2 weeks. Now I'm looking at $7 a payroll. Well, it used to take me at least 45 minutes to do all of the math around payroll, and especially when I've got 10 or 12 employees in the middle of the summer. Now it's all automated and just taken care of for me. And I can get a report on here that has all of the individual logs as well of when people punched in and when they punched out. So I've actually got that data as well. And it's all on my email, so it's all backed up in Gmail servers. So, yeah.
So, sorry.
That's okay.
So that's an app through iPad, but then that's linked up, the payroll through your QuickBooks, correct?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, so I get the data here and my QuickBooks, I don't do the payroll through QuickBooks. I have a service called ADP that I use for that. So that I'm able to do that. They take all the taxes out and everything, so I don't have to try messing around with those tax schedules myself.
Got it.
The other thing, and I don't know why I ended up with such a crappy picture of this. I did good on everything else, I think. But these are these 3x5 cards, and we print these off. And this is actually when we want to collect specific time data about a specific job, like how long did it take? How much time did we spend cleaning the shop? How long does it take to harvest Swiss chard? So we have job, how much got finished, who start, and total time. And because everybody's already carrying these on the farm, these go right in with them. You have to buy the right kind of printer to do this. You want to get one that can handle 3x5 note cards, but you could also chop these up yourself if you wanted to with a paper cutter. But this has been a nice way to gather productivity information. How long does it take the average person to bunch the average bunch of Swiss chard on our farm? And that begins to, again, starts to give us benchmarks about how much does it cost to harvest Swiss chard on our farm. Therefore, how much should we be charging for the Swiss chard on our farm? So talk a little bit about packing and harvest traceability, because this is important in both GAPS and the organic certification. So we use these same tags. We use a larger binder clip, but these get clipped onto those gray plastic totes that we're using for harvesting, and I should have had a better picture of that. But that's, and again, it says rutabagas, and then it's got the lot code right on there. Those are rutabagas down there that one's clipped on. Those are turnips up above. I do know what I'm talking about here. Whoops, I left a picture on there. So the date code, I cribbed this slide from another slideshow. So the date code gets written down at the bottom, and then the step and the batch codes are actually written up here, and those things go together on these forms to make the lot code. So we have the input code there, today's date code, or the day that this work was being performed there, and then the step, and then the batch. And so that becomes the code that would get written down on the card that's going through the process, or on a label of something that's being shipped out of here. Well, there, output lot code here. So, and then we got the 4 sheets. So this is our harvest sheet here. Now what we've done is on all of our logs then, anything that's shaded you're not required to fill out. But anything that's not shaded, you absolutely have to fill out as part of completing the work. Okay? So we have the crop, the goal, the field that we harvested stuff out of, any notes. So the notes is gray, the goal is gray, and then you're in the step in the batch code. For harvest, it's always step 1. We restart the clock essentially. So we run everything out through the field, right, through all the planting processes. But once we start harvesting, we drop the 4-letter crop and variety code, and then it just becomes a 6-digit lot code that travels with the name of the product at that point. Because once I harvest it, I don't need to track whether it was purple top turnips or whether it was improved purple top turnips. And then people's initials on there as well. So then this harvest form, this is where we began to incorporate some of the GAPS processes in here. We're required in section 2.1 of the GAPS audit, requires us to make a pre-harvest assessment. You have to look at the field and say, hey, is there any deer activity here? Is there bird poop on the leaves? And so it says right here that I assessed and identified potential sources of contamination in these fields prior to harvest and made the harvest crew aware of necessary actions to avoid contamination. Then that fulfills that requirement. And then we have the person who does that initials it. So rather than doing a walk through the field like I was told to do by extension every Sunday afternoon, right, because I don't have anything better to do on a Sunday afternoon, to make a pre-harvest inspection maybe a week before I'm going to pick from that field, now I'm doing a pre-harvest inspection when it really counts, when we're actually picking. And I'm taking, whoever's in charge of the crew is looking and going, is there deer poop in the field? Oh, there's deer poop in the field. I need to tell everybody not to harvest next to the deer poop. It kind of boiled things down to being really simple. I don't need a food safety officer to walk through and do an inspection of the fields. Everybody can see if there's deer poop out there. Okay? And then we've got the instructions, again, completing the non-shaded columns for every crop, using the step code, and then the accountability tool here. We keep track of the harvest crew. That's also important from a food safety standpoint, right? If we have a problem on the farm, I want to be able to track back to where, was somebody sick that day. That would be something that we would record via Gmail. If somebody goes home sick in a day, Ben would send me an email and say, hey, Susie went home sick today. She was vomiting. And we now have a record of that because that becomes a potential tool for us to use in solving a problem. And then the other thing this does is then I've got my quality check too, right? If we ship out stuff and I get a whole bunch of credit requests on my Swiss chard, now I can say who was working on that Swiss chard. And we might have, again, you asked how many of these do we fill out in a day? We actually fill one of these out for each harvest, kind of block of harvest that we do. So if we're going to go out and do Swiss chard and parsley and kale, that might go on one person's hands. But then if we're going to send another crew out for herbs, we would fill out yet another sheet for that, and yet another sheet if we were going to go harvest some rutabagas down at the rental ground. So we batch all these together. We can end up with a lot of pages of paper. We do the same sort of thing with our packing list, and the packing list starts to incorporate an input code here. So this is getting here, these cipollini onions, those were up to a certain input code there. See, lettuce mix, salad and lettuce mix. So this is something where we're bagging this, and I can see that because here, so this is, date code is 0285. The step code on this one is 2. So we washed it, or we harvested it, we washed it, and so now the washed salad mix has a step code of 2. We always wait 24 hours between washing and bagging because that kind of seems to let the moisture settle a little bit for us. And then when we bag it, that becomes another step in the process that we record. So the input code was step 2 because it was washed, and I can track that back through the form from yesterday. And then the output code is going to have a step code of 3 on it. So we created a unique identifier for each step of the process. And then this also then incorporates whether the equipment was cleaned or not, okay? Which again is another requirement. Do you log your equipment cleaning? Well, now we've logged the equipment cleaning, even though it doesn't say necessarily exactly what time it happened. It says that it did happen prior to cleaning the produce. Same thing with the Csa Records. It's pretty much the same idea. Some other information. We also do a shipping log here. That's because I don't do my own trucking. I don't necessarily know if a box with a given lot code, if I had 2 beets that were washed and packed on 2 different days, they've got 2 different lot codes, I don't necessarily know which store those went to. I just know that those went on the truck. So this is where we're tracking the lot codes that we shipped here and the product. And then this also incorporates a clean truck log. So when I have somebody that comes down from Featherstone Farm to pick up my produce, to take it up to the Twin Cities, they're actually, first of all, I don't want to have to be there. So I don't want to have to inspect the truck because if they show up at 6 o'clock and I'm in town doing Taekwondo with my daughter, I don't want to have to worry about it. Okay? So this has, completed by the person who's supervising the loading of the vehicle. Here's their name, here's their company, and then they're verifying that the vehicle is suitable for transporting fresh produce. So that becomes, again, part of our, it provides accountability on Featherstone's part, but it also provides us with the information that we need to say that that the trucks are inspected. It doesn't say, the audit forms don't say that you have to inspect the truck, it just says that the truck has to be inspected. And then we do invoicing in QuickBooks, and then that invoice has a ship date on it here that tracks back to the packing, to the shipping log, which then can be tracked back because it's got the lot code that then you can just track that back through the entire process all the way back to the day and time on which it was harvested. So where does the information go? So when we're filing stuff, again, I mentioned we're just doing simple filing at the most basic level that we can. We try to keep things in more or less chronological order, but if something gets out of chronological order, we don't throw a fit about it. Okay? Those colored forms, at the end of the year, we take all those forms, we put them in a 5/9 bushel box, and we stick them on a shelf in the utility closet. Okay? Once we're done, we put them up there. I had somebody ask me, well, how long do you keep all these records for? And they were really concerned about this. And I said, who cares how long you keep it for? You put it in a box, you put it in the closet, it's still going to be there in 10 years, then you can probably throw it away. Who cares? So we're storing stuff away. Now, eventually, like the weight of all the paperwork might begin to start causing some subsidence, but, wrapping up then. Again, I want to just remind people, I've shown you a lot of examples today, and what I've really shown you is I think, is kind of the cup, right? I've shown you what I do on my farm. I've given a system and sort of an outline and a broad overview, but it's really been about my operation. And you can look at some of these ideas, and what I hope you would do is say, well, how does this fit on my farm? Not necessarily that I have to have a form that looks exactly like Rock Spring Farms directive, but how does this work on my operation? What do I know about what I need? How does this work with my certifier? How does this work with my GAPS auditor? So it is about the coffee and not about the cup. I will remind you then also to make sure that you've got systems that are responsive to your own needs. Okay? And if something's not working, change it. It's one of the dangerous things about having printed forms. It feels like once you print something out that you've kind of got something that's rigid and you have to stick with for the rest of your life because it's in print, right? It's got authority once it's on paper. But just remember, that's why you did all this stuff on the computer in the first place, because now you can cross it out and start all over again. So if it's not working for you, do something else. And that doesn't work, do something else. And don't be afraid to tweak and modify as you go. And do remember to have a little bit of fun with this stuff. Paperwork is, fun and paperwork, right? We put all that together. That just doesn't make a lot of sense. But, one of the funny things stupid little things that I like to do is work with color. I keep an easy button from Staples next to my desk. And you know, when I get done with a bookkeeping task, I slap the easy button. And it goes, that was easy. Even if it wasn't, at least I kind of go, and I go, God, I'm such a cheese guy, you know. But there you go.